The ambulance sirens wailed through the crisp October afternoon as Unit 47 raced down Maple Street in suburban Hartford, Connecticut. Paramedic Margaret O'Sullivan gripped the passenger handle, her radio crackling with urgent dispatch updates about a cardiac emergency at Sunset Senior Center. In her 28 years of emergency response, she'd seen every possible delay. Traffic jams, construction, accidents, but never this. A massive German shepherd sat squarely in the middle of the road, amber eyes locked onto their windshield with unsettling intensity. Driver Tom Bradley leaned on the horn, the deafening blast echoing off the tree-lined street, but the dog didn't flinch. Instead, it maintained its position with military precision, as if executing a carefully planned mission. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, attempting to swerve around the animal. The dog shifted, blocking their path again. Margaret's pulse quickened as those intelligent eyes seemed to pierce straight through her, desperately trying to communicate something she couldn't understand. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Harold Thompson adjusted his reading glasses as he sat at his kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through lace curtains that Martha had hung 23 years ago. At 76, the retired English teacher still maintained the precise habits that had defined his 45 years at Hartford Public School. Coffee at 6:30, morning pills at 7, walk with Rex by 7:15. The routine was all that kept the loneliness at bay since Martha's death 2 years ago. Rex, his 5-year-old German shepherd, watched from his bed near the back door with alert amber eyes. The dog had been Harold's salvation after Martha lost her battle with cancer. A former military service dog, retired due to PTSD, matched with Harold through the Veterans Affairs adoption program. Though Harold had never served in combat, the VA counselor explained that Rex needed someone who understood loss and quiet strength. "Ready for our walk, boy?" Harold asked, reaching for the leash hanging by the door. Rex's tail wagged once, a controlled response that still carried hints of his military training. The property tax notice on Harold's counter remained unopened, another reminder of the financial pressures mounting since Martha's medical bills. His teacher's pension and Social Security barely covered the basics, and the thought of selling their colonial home on Elm Street, the house where they'd raised Sarah, felt like betraying Martha's memory. Margaret O'Sullivan checked her equipment for the third time that morning as she prepared for another shift with Hartford Emergency Medical Services. 28 years of responding to crises had taught her to trust her instincts, a skill that had saved countless lives. The Irish Catholic work ethic instilled by her parents kept her grounded, even when the healthcare system seemed to fail those who needed it most. Her thoughts drifted to her mother's final days in the nursing home during COVID lockdowns, another victim of policies that prioritized procedure over compassion. Those memories still stung, fueling her determination to fight for patients when bureaucracy stood in the way of care. 3,000 miles away in Portland, Oregon, Sarah Thompson Williams stared at her laptop screen, the termination email still glowing in her inbox. At 48, she was starting over again after her marketing firm downsized. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years climbing the corporate ladder while her father aged alone across the country, and now she had neither career success nor family closeness to show for her choices. Next week marked Harold's 77th birthday, and guilt gnawed at her for missing the last 2 celebrations. She'd been planning a surprise visit, scraping together money for airfare despite her precarious financial situation. Her teenage kids needed her present, but so did her father, and the weight of divided loyalties pressed heavily on her conscience. Harold clipped Rex's leash and stepped into the October morning, unaware that this routine walk would forever change the lives of everyone whose paths would soon intersect with his faithful companion's unwavering loyalty. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen maple leaves as Harold and Rex made their way along the familiar path through Maple Grove Park. Harold's weathered hands gripped his walking stick, a concession to age that he'd reluctantly accepted after a minor fall last spring. The park held 20 years of memories: morning walks with Martha before her illness, weekend picnics when Sarah visited with the grandchildren, countless conversations with his beloved wife on the bench overlooking the creek. "You know, Rex," Harold murmured, his breath visible in the cool morning air, "Martha used to say this park was God's way of reminding us that beauty exists even in the changing seasons." The dog's ears perked at Martha's name, a conditioned response that never failed to tug at Harold's heart. Rex had been with them during Martha's final months, somehow sensing her decline before the doctors confirmed the cancer's return. As they approached the creek area, Rex suddenly stopped, his body going rigid with attention. The German shepherd's head turned toward the dense cluster of oak trees near the water's edge, his nose working the air with military precision. Harold had learned to respect Rex's instincts. The dog's training had saved lives in Afghanistan, and his awareness often picked up details that escaped human perception. "What is it, boy?" Harold asked, following Rex's gaze toward the secluded area behind the large oak tree. The dog whined softly, a sound Harold had come to associate with Rex's anxiety episodes. The PTSD that had ended Rex's military career still surfaced occasionally, triggered by unexpected sounds or unfamiliar situations. Harold felt a strange dizziness wash over him as they continued walking. He attributed it to skipping breakfast in his haste to avoid the unopened property tax notice on his kitchen counter. The financial pressures had been mounting for months: heating bills, prescription costs, the endless stream of medical expenses that Medicare didn't cover. At 76, Harold found himself considering options he'd never imagined: selling the house, moving to assisted living, becoming a burden on Sarah just when she was establishing her own independence. The dizzy spell intensified as they reached the bench where he and Martha used to sit. Harold's left hand tingled strangely, and he noticed his speech felt thick when he tried to call Rex back from investigating the nearby bushes. These symptoms should have alarmed him, but pride and a lifetime of New England stoicism made him dismiss them as signs of aging rather than medical emergency. "Rex, come back here," he attempted to call, but the words came out slurred and unclear. The walking stick slipped from his suddenly weak grip, clattering against the bench as Harold's knees buckled. The world tilted sideways as he collapsed behind the massive oak tree, his blue jacket a stark contrast against the carpet of fallen leaves. Rex's military training kicked in immediately. The dog abandoned his exploration and rushed to Harold's side, his nose pushing against Harold's face, searching for signs of consciousness. Harold's eyes fluttered, barely focusing on his faithful companion's worried expression. "Rex," Harold whispered with tremendous effort, his voice barely audible. "Get help. Like we practiced." For 6 months, Harold had been secretly training Rex for this exact scenario. Not because he expected a stroke, but because living alone at his age carried inherent risks. The training sessions had been their secret: commands disguised as games, emergency protocols hidden within their daily routines. Harold had hoped they'd never need to use them. Rex understood. His military background had included medical alert training, and Harold's patient repetition had reinforced those dormant skills. The dog's first instinct was to drag Harold toward the main path, but at 180 pounds of dead weight, even Rex's considerable strength couldn't move the unconscious man more than a few feet. The morning grew colder as Rex maintained his vigil beside Harold's motionless form. Joggers passed on the distant main path, but the secluded location behind the oak tree kept them hidden from view. Rex tried barking to attract attention, but the sound carried poorly through the dense foliage, and his deep voice could easily be mistaken for a dog playing in the park. Hour after hour, Rex faced an impossible choice between his protective instincts and his training. Military dogs were taught never to abandon their charge, but they were also trained to seek help when medical emergencies occurred. As Harold's body temperature dropped and his breathing became increasingly shallow, Rex's anxiety intensified. The German Shepherd tried repeatedly to drag Harold's unconscious form toward the main road, but the effort proved futile. Each attempt left Rex more frustrated and Harold in a more precarious position among the roots and fallen branches. By noon, Rex had exhausted himself trying to move his master, and Harold's lips were taking on a dangerous blue tinge from prolonged exposure to the October chill. Rex's PTSD began manifesting as the hours stretched on. The helplessness of watching someone he was supposed to protect slowly dying triggered memories of battlefield medical emergencies where his intervention hadn't been enough. The dog's breathing became rapid and shallow, his body trembling not just from cold, but from psychological distress. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting longer shadows through the park, Rex made the most difficult decision of his life. Harold's whispered command echoed in his memory. "Get help," like we practiced. The dog pressed his nose against Harold's cold cheek one final time, whimpering softly at leaving his master vulnerable and alone. Rex's powerful legs carried him through the park toward Maple Street, his military training overriding every instinct that screamed at him to stay and guard Harold. The dog had learned to trust his training even when it contradicted his emotions, and that discipline now drove him toward what he hoped would be salvation. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance made Rex's ears perk with recognition. His enhanced hearing, developed through years of military service, could distinguish between different emergency vehicles. This was an ambulance, the exact type of help Harold needed. Rex's pace quickened as he reached the main road, his amber eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle with laser-like intensity. Unit 47 was responding to an unrelated cardiac emergency at Sunset Senior Center when Rex positioned himself with strategic precision in the center of Maple Street. The German Shepherd's military bearing was unmistakable as he sat at attention, blocking the ambulance's path with unwavering determination. This wasn't the random behavior of a confused animal. This was a trained service dog executing an emergency protocol. Rex's amber eyes locked onto the ambulance windshield with an intensity that transcended normal animal behavior. Every fiber of his being was focused on one mission: getting these medical professionals to understand that someone needed their help. The dog's position was calculated, his body language deliberate, his gaze unwavering as the sirens grew louder and the ambulance was forced to stop. Margaret O'Sullivan's trained eyes immediately recognized something extraordinary about the German Shepherd blocking their path. In 28 years of emergency response, she'd encountered countless animals, strays, aggressive guard dogs, confused pets, but this was different. The dog's posture spoke of military discipline, his amber eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human in its desperation. "Move it, you stupid mutt!" Tom Bradley shouted through the open driver's window, his hand pressed firmly on the horn. The blaring sound echoed off the residential houses lining Maple Street, but Rex didn't flinch. Instead, the dog's gaze intensified, shifting between Margaret and Tom with calculated precision. Margaret's radio crackled with dispatch updates. "Unit 47, what's your status? Sunset Senior Center is reporting a critical cardiac emergency. ETA." Tom grabbed the radio before Margaret could respond. "Dispatch, we've got a large dog blocking the roadway on Maple Street, attempting to clear the obstruction." "Copy that, Unit 47. Animal Control has been notified. Proceed to your call immediately." The urgency in the dispatcher's voice reminded Margaret of their primary responsibility, but something about Rex's behavior nagged at her professional instincts. She'd built her career on reading situations quickly, and every fiber of her experience suggested this wasn't a random encounter. Tom shifted the ambulance into reverse, attempting to back up and find an alternate route around the dog. Rex immediately stood and repositioned himself, again blocking their path with strategic precision. The maneuver was too calculated, too purposeful to be coincidental. "Jesus Christ," Tom muttered, his frustration mounting. "We're going to be written up for this delay. That cardiac patient could die while we're playing games with some escaped pet." Margaret studied Rex's body language more carefully. The dog's ears were forward and alert, his tail held high but not wagging, classic signs of a working dog in active duty mode. His coat showed signs of prolonged outdoor exposure, with bits of leaves and moisture clinging to his fur, suggesting he'd been in the elements for hours. "Tom, look at him," Margaret said quietly. "Really look. That's not random behavior. He's trying to tell us something." "Come on, Margaret. It's a dog. They don't—" Rex suddenly turned and took 3 deliberate steps toward the park entrance, then stopped and looked back at the ambulance. The movement was so clearly communicative that even Tom's skepticism wavered. "Did you see that?" Margaret asked, her pulse quickening with recognition. "He wants us to follow him." The radio exploded with static. "Unit 47, dispatch. Your delay is causing backup issues across the district. Clear that roadway immediately and proceed to your assignment." Margaret's hand hovered over her radio, years of protocol warring with an instinct she couldn't ignore. She thought of her mother's final days, when rigid hospital policies had prevented family visits during the most critical moments. Sometimes rules needed to bend for human compassion. "Tom, give me 30 seconds. "Margaret, we can't—" 30 seconds. Her voice carried the authority of nearly 3 decades in emergency medicine. "If I'm wrong, we'll continue to the call." Against his better judgment, Tom shifted into park as Margaret opened her door. The October air hit her immediately, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and something else. The faint but unmistakable smell of human distress that experienced paramedics learned to recognize. Rex's entire demeanor changed when Margaret stepped out of the ambulance. The dog's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement, before he turned and began walking purposefully toward the park entrance. Every few steps he looked back to ensure Margaret was following, his behavior eerily reminiscent of search and rescue dogs she'd worked with during her early career. "This is insane!" Tom called from the driver's seat, but he made no move to stop her. Margaret followed Rex approximately 50 yards into Maple Grove Park, her medical bag slung over her shoulder out of habit. The dog led her along a winding path she wouldn't have noticed on her own, past benches and through a cluster of mature oak trees toward a secluded area near the creek. That's when she saw the flash of blue fabric behind the largest oak tree. "Dear God," Margaret whispered, rushing forward as Rex barked once, sharp and urgent. Harold Thompson lay motionless among the fallen leaves, his face pale and lips tinged with the dangerous blue of hypothermia. Margaret's trained hands immediately went to his neck, feeling for a pulse that was weak but present. His body temperature was alarmingly low, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. "Tom!" she shouted toward the ambulance. "Medical emergency! Bring the stretcher and warming blankets." Rex sat beside Harold's unconscious form, his vigil finally ended but his alertness unwavering. The dog's fur was damp with morning dew and his paws showed signs of having tried to dig or scratch at the ground, evidence of prolonged attempts to move or warm his master. Margaret began her rapid assessment while calling out vital signs to Tom, who was running toward them with emergency equipment. Elderly male, approximately 75 to 80 years old, unconscious, possible stroke symptoms, severe hypothermia. Looks like he's been down for hours. As she worked to stabilize Harold, Margaret noticed the dog's behavior becoming increasingly agitated. Rex whined softly and paced in tight circles, classic signs of a service animal whose handler was in medical distress. The pieces began falling into place. This wasn't just a pet who'd found an injured stranger. This was a trained service dog who'd executed an emergency response protocol. "How long have you been out here with him, boy?" Margaret murmured to Rex as she started an IV line in Harold's arm. The German shepherd's amber eyes seemed to understand her question, his soft whine conveying hours of helpless vigil. Tom arrived with the stretcher and warming equipment, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional focus. "Jesus, Margaret, if you hadn't followed that dog—" "I know," she replied grimly, wrapping Harold in thermal blankets. "He would have died out here, probably within the hour." As they loaded Harold onto the stretcher, Rex attempted to follow. The dog's distress became immediately apparent when medical personnel tried to separate him from Harold, classic behavior of a bonded service animal whose training included staying with their handler during medical emergencies. "We can't take the dog in the ambulance," Tom said automatically, reciting standard protocol. Margaret looked at Rex's desperate expression, then at Harold's unconscious face. In 28 years of emergency response, she'd never violated transport protocols, but she'd also never encountered a situation where a service dog had literally saved someone's life by stopping an ambulance. "Unit 47 to dispatch," she said into her radio, making a decision that could end her career. "We have a critical medical emergency requiring immediate transport to Hartford Hospital. Patient is accompanied by a service animal who will be transported with us per ADA requirements." It wasn't entirely true. She hadn't confirmed Rex's official service animal status, but the lie came easily. Some rules were meant to be broken when lives hung in the balance. Rex jumped into the ambulance without hesitation, positioning himself beside Harold's stretcher with practiced precision. As Tom started the engine and activated the sirens, Margaret watched the remarkable bond between man and dog that had just saved Harold's life. She thought of her mother's final words about the importance of compassion over protocol, and for the first time in months, Margaret felt she'd honored that lesson. The automatic doors of Hartford Hospital's emergency department burst open as Margaret and Tom wheeled Harold through the entrance, Rex trotting alongside the stretcher with unwavering determination. The German shepherd's presence immediately drew stares from hospital staff, patients, and visitors, but Rex remained focused solely on Harold's unconscious form. "Room 3 is ready," called Nurse Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran whose experience had taught her to prioritize medical emergencies over policy questions. She noticed the dog but said nothing, trusting Margaret's judgment after working countless shifts together. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked up from a patient chart as the team approached, her dark eyes immediately assessing Harold's condition before noting the unusual four-legged addition to their party. "What do we have?" "Elderly male, approximately 76, found unconscious in Maple Grove Park after what appears to be a stroke episode. Patient has been down for an estimated 6 hours, severe hypothermia, weak pulse, BP 70/40. Margaret rattled off the vitals while helping transfer Harold to the examination table. Rex attempted to follow Harold into the treatment room, but hospital security officer James Murphy stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but animals aren't allowed in the treatment areas. Hospital policy." "He's a service dog," Margaret said firmly, the lie becoming easier with repetition. "He alerted us to the patient's location. Without him, this man would be dead." Dr. Rodriguez paused in her examination, studying Rex's behavior. The dog sat at perfect attention beside Harold's bed, his amber eyes never leaving the unconscious man's face. His posture and training were unmistakable. This was no ordinary pet. "James, let's focus on the patient for now," Dr. Rodriguez said diplomatically. "We can sort out the dog situation once we've stabilized the gentleman." As the medical team worked to warm Harold's core temperature and assess the extent of his stroke damage, Rex remained motionless except for the slight tremor in his front legs, exhaustion finally taking its toll after hours of vigilance. The dog's dedication was obvious to everyone in the room, creating an unspoken agreement to allow his presence during the immediate crisis. Margaret found herself studying Harold's face as Dr. Rodriguez performed her neurological assessment. Something about his features nagged at her memory. The shape of his nose, the way his gray hair fell across his forehead. She'd seen this face before, but couldn't place where or when. "Any identification?" Dr. Rodriguez asked while checking Harold's pupil response. Tom produced Harold's wallet from the personal effects bag. "Harold Thompson, age 76, address on Elm Street." Emergency contact is Sarah Thompson Williams in Portland, Oregon. The name hit Margaret like a physical blow. Harold Thompson, room 237, Hartford High School, 1987. Mr. Thompson's advanced English class, where a troubled 17-year-old girl from a broken home had discovered that words could be weapons against injustice, that education could be an escape route from generational poverty. "Oh my God," Margaret whispered, her professional composure cracking. "Mr. Thompson?" Dr. Rodriguez looked up sharply. "You know him?" "He was my teacher, 36 years ago." Margaret's voice caught as memories flooded back. Harold's patient encouragement when she'd struggled with Shakespeare, his recommendation letter that had helped her get into nursing school, the quiet conversation after class when he'd noticed bruises on her arms and helped her find resources for dealing with her father's drinking. The heart monitor's steady beeping provided a backdrop to Margaret's emotional revelation. This man had changed the trajectory of her entire life, steering her toward a career that had allowed her to help thousands of people over nearly 3 decades. The irony of finding him unconscious in a park, of being the one responsible for saving his life, felt like divine intervention. "Small world," Dr. Rodriguez murmured, returning her attention to Harold's care. "Let's make sure we get your teacher stabilized." Meanwhile, Rex's presence was creating ripples throughout the hospital. Word spread quickly through the staff about the dog who had stopped an ambulance to save his owner, and employees began finding excuses to walk past the emergency room. The story took on legendary proportions, with each retelling a loyal German shepherd using intelligence and determination to orchestrate a rescue that professional emergency services had missed. Chief Administrator Robert Hayes received the call about the policy violation within 20 minutes of Harold's arrival. A by-the-book administrator with 30 years of hospital management experience, Hayes prided himself on maintaining strict protocols that protected the institution from liability issues. "There's a dog in the emergency department," his assistant informed him over the intercom. "Security says the paramedic claimed it was a service animal, but we have no documentation." Hayes sighed heavily. Service animal regulations were a constant source of confusion and potential lawsuits. The Americans with Disabilities Act provided clear protections for legitimate service animals, but emotional support animals and therapy dogs fell into grayer areas that required careful navigation. "I'll handle this personally," Hayes said, grabbing his clipboard and heading toward the emergency department. As Harold's condition slowly stabilized under warming blankets and IV fluids, Dr. Rodriguez found herself studying Rex's behavior with growing fascination. The dog's positioning beside the bed, his alert posture despite obvious exhaustion, and his calm response to medical equipment suggested extensive training beyond basic obedience. "Has anyone scanned him for a microchip?" she asked the nursing staff. Nurse Williams produced a handheld scanner from the supply closet. "Let's see what we can find out about our 4-legged hero." The scanner beeped immediately when passed over Rex's shoulder. The information displayed on the small screen made Dr. Rodriguez pause. Rex, German Shepherd, DOB 2019, owner, U.S. Army Veterinary Corps, status, retired medical alert, PTSD service dog. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Rodriguez muttered. "He really is a service dog, military trained." The revelation added weight to Margaret's earlier claims and provided legal justification for Rex's presence in the hospital. More importantly, it explained the dog's remarkable behavior and tactical precision in stopping the ambulance. Chief Administrator Hayes arrived at the emergency department just as Dr. Rodriguez was documenting Rex's microchip information. His stern expression suggested he was prepared for a confrontation about policy violations. "Dr. Rodriguez, I understand we have an unauthorized animal in the treatment area," Hayes began in his official capacity voice. "Actually, Robert, we have a retired military service dog who saved a man's life," Dr. Rodriguez replied, showing him the microchip scanner results. "This dog stopped an ambulance and led paramedics to his unconscious owner. Without his intervention, Mr. Thompson would have died of exposure in the park." Hayes examined the documentation, his administrative mind already calculating the public relations implications. A story about a heroic service dog being ejected from a hospital would be a publicity nightmare, especially if it involved a military veteran animal. "What's the patient's condition?" Hayes asked, shifting from policy enforcement to damage control. "Stable but critical. Stroke with severe hypothermia. He's lucky to be alive," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "The dog's been through significant trauma himself. Look at him. He's exhausted but won't leave his owner's side. Separating them now could actually harm both the patient and the animal." Rex, as if sensing he was the subject of discussion, lifted his head to look at Chief Administrator Hayes. The dog's amber eyes held an intelligence and dignity that made dismissing him as just an animal impossible. Hayes found himself in an unprecedented situation. Hospital policy clearly prohibited animals in treatment areas, but the legal protections for service animals, combined with the extraordinary circumstances and potential media attention, created a complex decision matrix. "Dr. Rodriguez, I need you to document everything. The dog's service animal status, the rescue circumstances, the medical necessity of keeping them together," Hayes said finally. "If we're going to make an exception, it needs to be bulletproof from a legal standpoint." As the evening shift arrived and word of Rex's heroic actions spread throughout Hartford Hospital, the story began taking on a life of its own. Social media posts from staff members who had witnessed the scene started circulating, accompanied by photos of Rex maintaining his vigil beside Harold's bed. Dr. Rodriguez completed her initial assessment and prepared to move Harold to a regular room for continued monitoring. Rex stood immediately when the transfer began, his training overriding his exhaustion as he prepared to follow his owner wherever the medical team decided to take him. "Looks like you've got a permanent shadow, Mr. Thompson," Dr. Rodriguez murmured to the unconscious man. "Let's hope you wake up soon to see what a remarkable friend you have." The call to Sarah Thompson Williams came at 3:47 p.m. Pacific Time, just as she was reviewing her latest batch of rejection emails from potential employers. The unfamiliar Connecticut area code made her heart skip before she even answered. No good news ever came from unexpected calls involving her father's location. "Ms. Thompson Williams, this is Dr. Elena Rodriguez from Hartford Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Harold Thompson." Sarah's world tilted sideways. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Your father suffered a stroke this morning and was found unconscious in Maple Grove Park. He's currently stable but in critical condition. I need to ask, does your father have a service dog?" The question seemed surreal amidst the medical emergency. "Rex? Yes, he's a German Shepherd. Why?" "Because that dog saved your father's life today. He stopped an ambulance and led paramedics directly to where your father had collapsed. Without Rex's intervention, we would be having a very different conversation." Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, processing the impossible reality that her father was fighting for his life 3,000 miles away while she sat surrounded by job rejection letters and overdue bills. The guilt that had been gnawing at her for months, missing his last 2 birthdays, the infrequent phone calls, the constant promises to visit that never materialized, now felt crushing. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has significant stroke damage and severe hypothermia from being exposed to the elements for approximately 6 hours. The next 24 hours are critical. I strongly recommend you come if possible." Sarah looked at her laptop screen displaying her bank balance, $247.83, and felt the familiar panic of financial inadequacy. A last-minute flight to Hartford would cost at least $800, money she simply didn't have. Her recent job loss had eliminated any emergency funds, and her pride had prevented her from asking for help. I'll try to get there," she said, knowing it was impossible. "Ms. Thompson-Williams, there's something else. Your father's dog is here with him, and we're allowing Rex to stay for now due to his service animal status. However, our administration is reviewing the situation. The dog appears to be suffering from exhaustion and stress, but he refuses to leave your father's side." After ending the call, Sarah sat in her Portland kitchen staring at the rain streaking down her windows, feeling more alone and helpless than she had since her divorce 5 years earlier. Her teenagers, Emma and Jake, were at their father's house for the week. Another reminder of her fractured family situation. The silence was broken by her phone ringing again. Mark's name appeared on the screen, causing Sarah to hesitate before answering. Her ex-husband's timing was always either perfect or terrible, never merely coincidental. "Sarah, I just got a call from Emma. She's worried because you sounded upset when she called earlier. What's going on?" Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself explaining the situation to Mark. Despite their failed marriage, he had always respected Harold, appreciating the older man's quiet dignity and unwavering support during their divorce proceedings. "How much do you need for the flight?" Mark asked without hesitation. "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Harold was there for both of us when everything fell apart. Send me the flight information." Sarah's pride warred with desperation, but the thought of her father lying unconscious while she counted pennies made the decision inevitable. "Thank you, Mark. I'll pay you back. Just go take care of your dad." Back at Hartford Hospital, Rex's vigil had become the talk of the medical staff. The German Shepherd had positioned himself beside Harold's bed with military precision, accepting water and small amounts of food from sympathetic nurses but never straying more than a few feet from his unconscious owner. Dr. Rodriguez found herself checking on Harold's progress more frequently than medically necessary, drawn by the remarkable bond between man and dog. Rex's behavior suggested training far beyond typical service animal protocols. His positioning allowed him to monitor Harold's breathing. His alert posture indicated he was scanning for changes in his owner's condition, and his controlled responses to medical staff showed sophisticated socialization. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" asked Nurse Patricia Williams during her evening rounds. "Not in 20 years of emergency medicine," Dr. Rodriguez replied, watching Rex's ears perk at the sound of Harold's slightly labored breathing. "It's like he's conducting his own medical assessment." Margaret O'Sullivan finished her shift paperwork but found herself reluctant to leave the hospital. The revelation that Harold was her former teacher had stirred emotions she'd buried for decades. Room 237, Advanced English, Fall Semester 1987, the classroom where an angry, lost teenager had discovered that words could be tools of empowerment rather than weapons of destruction. She remembered the day Harold had kept her after class, not to punish her for the attitude that terrorized other teachers, but to quietly ask if everything was okay at home. His gentle persistence had eventually led to her admission about her father's drinking, her mother's depression, and the violence that made homework impossible most nights. Harold hadn't offered empty platitudes or temporary solutions. Instead, he'd connected her with the school counselor, helped her apply for a work-study program, and written the recommendation letter that had secured her nursing school scholarship. He'd seen potential in a girl that most adults had written off as trouble. Margaret made a decision that surprised her. Instead of going home to her empty apartment, She went to Harold's room and settled into the visitor's chair opposite Rex's position. The dog acknowledged her presence with a brief glance before returning his attention to Harold's still form. "I never got to thank him properly," she said quietly to Rex, who tilted his head as if listening. 36 years ago, he changed my life. Now, maybe I can help change his." As evening deepened into night, Rex's exhaustion became increasingly apparent despite his determination to maintain his vigil. Dr. Rodriguez observed the dog's slight tremor and labored breathing with growing concern. Service animals were trained to work through discomfort, sometimes to their own detriment. "Rex," she said softly, approaching with a veterinary colleague she'd called for consultation. "Let's take a look at you, boy." The German Shepherd allowed the examination but kept his eyes fixed on Harold throughout the process. The veterinarian's assessment revealed dehydration, exhaustion, and stress indicators consistent with prolonged emergency response duty. "He needs rest, fluids, and probably some anxiety medication," the vet explained. "But separating him from his handler could cause more psychological damage than physical healing would address." Chief Administrator Hayes returned to check on the situation, his earlier policy concerns now complicated by the growing media attention. Local news stations had picked up the story of the heroic dog who stopped an ambulance, and the hospital's switchboard was fielding calls from reporters, animal welfare organizations, and curious citizens. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is becoming a public relations situation," Hayes said, showing her his phone screen displaying social media posts about Rex. "We have reporters asking for interviews and animal rights groups wanting to ensure the dog's welfare." "Then let's make sure we're on the right side of the story," Dr. Rodriguez replied pragmatically. "This is exactly the kind of positive publicity hospitals need. Compassionate care that goes beyond standard protocols." Hayes nodded slowly, his administrative mindset adapting to the unusual circumstances. "What do you need to make this work?" "Official approval for Rex to remain with his owner, veterinary support for the dog's care, and maybe a comfortable bed so he doesn't have to sleep on the floor." As the night shift took over, Harold's condition remained stable but unchanged. Rex finally accepted a small bed positioned beside Harold's hospital bed, though he continued his alert posture even while resting. Margaret remained in the visitor's chair, unwilling to leave until she knew Harold was out of immediate danger. Dr. Rodriguez completed her evening rounds with a sense of anticipation unusual for her typically clinical approach to patient care. The combination of Harold's medical situation, Rex's extraordinary dedication, and the human connections emerging around their story had created something special, a reminder of why she had chosen medicine in the first place. The overnight hours would prove critical for Harold's recovery, but Rex's unwavering presence provided a constant source of hope. As the German Shepherd finally settled into an exhausted sleep beside his owner's bed, the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath, waiting for signs that Harold Thompson would wake up to see the remarkable friend who had saved his life. Sarah's red-eye flight landed at Bradley International Airport at 6:23 a.m., her eyes swollen from crying and her body exhausted from a sleepless night of turbulence and worry. The taxi ride to Hartford Hospital felt endless, each mile increasing her anxiety about what she might find. She hadn't seen her father in 8 months, their last conversation awkwardly ending with promises to visit that both knew were unlikely to materialize. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and desperation, familiar scents that reminded Sarah of her mother's final days. Room 314 stood before her like a judgment, the number brass and cold against the sterile wall. Through the small window she could see her father's still form connected to monitors and IV lines, but what stopped her breath was the large German Shepherd lying on a bed beside him, amber eyes alert despite obvious exhaustion. "You must be Sarah," said a gentle voice behind her. "Doctor." Rodriguez approached with a tired smile and kind eyes that had clearly seen many family reunions in hospital hallways. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez. We spoke yesterday. How is he?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion she'd been holding back since the phone call. "Stable but unchanged. The stroke damage is significant, and the hypothermia complicated everything. However, your father is a fighter. His vital signs have been steady throughout the night." Sarah entered the room hesitantly, overwhelmed by seeing her strong, independent father reduced to this vulnerable state. Harold looked smaller somehow, his gray hair disheveled against the white pillow, his weathered hands pale and still. Rex raised his head as she approached, studying her with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess whether she belonged here. "Hello, Rex," Sarah whispered, extending her hand for the dog to sniff. "Thank you for saving him." Rex's tail moved slightly, not a wag, but acknowledgement. The German Shepherd had clearly been through his own trauma, his coat showing signs of prolonged outdoor exposure, and his body language indicating exhaustion held at bay only by duty and determination. Margaret O'Sullivan had remained in the visitor's chair throughout the night, catching brief naps between checking on Harold's condition. She stirred as Sarah entered, immediately recognizing the family resemblance despite not having seen Harold for over 30 years. "You look just like him," Margaret said softly. "Same stubborn chin." "I'm sorry. Are you a nurse?" Sarah asked, confused by the woman's civilian clothes and obvious emotional investment. "I'm the paramedic who brought him in. But more than that, your father was my teacher 36 years ago. He changed my life." Sarah felt a sudden rush of pride mixed with guilt. Here was a stranger who understood her father's impact better than she did, someone who had traveled across decades to be at his bedside while his own daughter had been absent for months at a time. Dr. Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation in the hallway. "I need to be honest with you about your father's prognosis. The stroke was significant, affecting speech and motor functions on his left side. Even if he recovers consciousness, there will likely be permanent disability requiring long-term care." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Long-term care meant nursing homes, rehabilitation costs, the end of her father's independence, everything he had feared most about aging. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was finally present for her father when he might no longer be truly present himself. "There's something else," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "We found some concerning items in your father's personal effects. Unpaid medical bills, property tax notices, and what appears to be correspondence with assisted living facilities. Were you aware of his financial situation?" Sarah's guilt deepened. She had been so focused on her own struggles, the divorce, job hunting, raising teenagers, that she had missed the signs of her father's declining circumstances. Harold's pride had prevented him from asking for help, while her assumption that he was managing fine had prevented her from offering it. "I had no idea," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. "He never said anything about money problems." Back in Harold's room, Rex had moved closer to the bed, his nose resting near Harold's hand, as if trying to provide comfort through proximity. The dog's dedication was remarkable and heartbreaking. He had been maintaining this vigil for over 18 hours, accepting minimal food and water while refusing to leave his unconscious owner's side. Chief Administrator Hayes arrived for his morning assessment of the situation, accompanied by a small entourage of department heads and legal advisors. The story of Rex stopping the ambulance had exploded on social media overnight, with video footage from security cameras and cell phones creating a viral sensation that was being covered by national news outlets. "Dr. Rodriguez, we have a situation," Hayes announced, his usual bureaucratic composure strained. "This story has gone national. Good Morning America wants to interview the dog. The mayor's office is calling about a heroism award. Animal welfare organizations are demanding assurance that the dog is being properly cared for." Sarah looked up sharply. Are you going to separate them? That's what we're trying to determine, Hayes replied diplomatically. Hospital policy exists for important reasons: infection control, patient safety, liability concerns. However, the circumstances here are unprecedented. Margaret stood from her chair, 36 years of suppressed gratitude suddenly finding voice. Mr. Hayes, with all due respect, this dog saved a man's life through intelligence and determination that most humans couldn't match. Harold Thompson saved my life when I was 17 years old, pulling me out of an abusive situation and setting me on a path that led to helping thousands of people over nearly 3 decades. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't found in policy manuals. Her words carried the weight of experience and conviction that silenced the administrative debate. Hayes found himself confronting the reality that some situations transcended bureaucratic solutions. As the morning progressed, Harold's condition began showing subtle signs of deterioration. His blood pressure fluctuated, his oxygen levels decreased, and neurological responses that had been stable overnight started becoming erratic. Dr. Rodriguez increased monitoring while adjusting medications, but the trend was concerning. Rex seemed to sense the change before the medical equipment registered it. The German Shepherd's alert posture intensified. His breathing became more rapid, and he began exhibiting behaviors that Margaret recognized from her research into service animal training, pawing gently at Harold's arm, positioning himself to potentially provide physical support, vocalizing softly in a pattern that suggested distress communication. "He knows," Dr. Rodriguez observed with amazement. "The dog is reading changes in his owner's condition that our monitors are just beginning to detect." Sarah watched Rex's behavior with growing understanding of the profound bond between her father and this remarkable animal. This wasn't just a pet. This was a partnership forged through mutual need, shared trauma, and unconditional loyalty that transcended species boundaries. The medical team worked to stabilize Harold's declining condition while Rex became increasingly agitated. The dog's military training warred with his emotional attachment, creating visible stress that concerned both the veterinary consultant and Dr. Rodriguez. "We need to make a decision about the dog," the veterinarian advised. "His stress levels are becoming dangerous for his own health. Service animals can literally work themselves to death trying to help their handlers." Hayes found himself in an impossible position. Separating Rex from Harold could cause psychological trauma to both man and dog, but allowing the situation to continue might result in 2 medical emergencies instead of 1. The media attention made every decision a potential public relations disaster. Margaret made another decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'll take responsibility for Rex, legally and medically. I'm staying here regardless, and I have experience with trauma responses from my years in emergency services." Sarah looked at this woman who had appeared from her father's past like a guardian angel, offering support when none existed elsewhere. "Why are you doing this?" "Because 36 years ago your father saw something in a broken teenager that nobody else saw. He didn't just teach me English literature. He taught me that one person's compassion can change everything. Maybe it's time to pay that forward." As Harold's condition continued fluctuating between stability and crisis, Rex maintained his determined vigil despite growing exhaustion. The German Shepherd's unwavering dedication created an emotional atmosphere in the room that affected everyone present, from hardened medical professionals to bureaucratic administrators who had never considered the healing power of interspecies loyalty. The afternoon brought new challenges as Harold's vital signs became increasingly erratic, requiring constant medical intervention while Rex's distress grew proportionally. The remarkable bond that had saved Harold's life was now threatening to claim both of them, creating a medical and ethical crisis that would test everyone's commitment to compassion over protocol. The devastating blow came at 2:17 p.m. when Harold's heart monitor began an erratic rhythm that sent the medical team into emergency action. Dr. Rodriguez rushed into the room as alarms blared, Rex immediately sensing the crisis and beginning to pace frantically beside the bed. Sarah watched in horror as her father's vital signs crashed, his blood pressure plummeting while his oxygen saturation dropped to dangerous levels. "He's going into cardiac arrest," Dr. Rodriguez announced, her hands already working to prepare emergency medications. "Sarah, I need you to step back. Margaret, can you control the dog?" Rex's military training clashed violently with his emotional attachment as medical personnel swarmed around Harold's bed. The German Shepherd's PTSD triggers activated simultaneously. The urgent voices, beeping machines, and sense of life-threatening emergency transported him back to battlefield medical tents where he had been powerless to save wounded soldiers. His protective instincts kicked in, and he began barking aggressively at the medical team, seeing them as threats to his handler rather than help. "Rex, down!" Margaret commanded, using the firm voice she had learned from years of emergency response, but the dog was beyond rational response. His amber eyes showed the wild panic of an animal reliving trauma, his body trembling with the effort to simultaneously protect Harold and fight his own psychological demons. The Code Blue team arrived with crash cart equipment, but Rex positioned himself between them and Harold's bed, his military training turning him into a formidable obstacle. At 90 pounds of muscle and determination, the German Shepherd represented a serious barrier to life-saving medical intervention. "We need that dog sedated immediately," Dr. Rodriguez called out while working to restart Harold's heart. "I can't work around him in this state." The veterinary consultant arrived with sedation equipment, but approaching Rex required navigating around the medical team trying to save Harold's life. Every second of delay potentially cost Harold his chance of survival, while forcing Rex to watch helplessly would likely cause permanent psychological damage to the already traumatized service dog. Sarah found herself caught between watching her father die and witnessing Rex's complete psychological breakdown. The dog's distress was heartbreaking, whining, pacing, pawing at the air as if trying to perform some intervention he couldn't reach. This was the animal who had saved her father's life, now being prevented from completing what he saw as his most important mission. "Please," Sarah begged Dr. Rodriguez through her tears, "don't let them hurt Rex. He doesn't understand what's happening." Margaret made a split-second decision based on her understanding of both emergency medicine and trauma response. Instead of allowing Rex to be sedated, she positioned herself between the dog and the medical team, speaking in calm, authoritative tones that cut through his panic. "Rex, medical team, friendly," she said, using terminology that service dogs were trained to recognize. "Harold safe, Rex safe, medical team helping." The combination of familiar commands and Margaret's steady presence seemed to penetrate Rex's panic. His aggressive posturing gradually diminished, though his distress remained obvious. He allowed the medical team to work while maintaining his vigil, his whole body shaking with the effort of suppressing his protective instincts. Harold's heart rhythm stabilized after 12 minutes of intensive intervention, but the crisis had revealed the severity of his condition. "Doctor." Rodriguez's expression remained grim as she reviewed the latest test results and consulted with the cardiac specialist who had been called in for emergency consultation. "Sarah, I need to speak with you privately," Dr. Rodriguez said, leading her into the hallway while Margaret remained with Rex and Harold. The conversation Sarah had been dreading finally arrived. Dr. Rodriguez explained that Harold had suffered additional brain damage during the cardiac episode, making his chances of meaningful recovery extremely remote. Even if he survived, he would likely remain in a vegetative state requiring full-time medical care. "We need to discuss end-of-life decisions," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "Your father has a living will, but the language is general rather than specific to this situation. As his next of kin, you may need to make some difficult choices." Sarah's world collapsed completely. She had flown across the country expecting to find her father recovering, hoping for conversations about their relationship and plans for his future care. Instead, she faced the possibility of deciding whether to continue life support for a man who might never wake up. The cruel irony was inescapable. Rex had performed a miracle by saving Harold's life, only for Sarah to potentially face the decision of ending it. The German Shepherd's heroic actions had bought them time that might ultimately prove meaningless, extending suffering rather than preserving life. Back in Harold's room, Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. His frantic energy had been replaced by an almost human-like grief, his head resting on his paws while his eyes never left Harold's face. The dog's intuitive understanding of death, developed through military service, was evident in his resigned posture. Margaret found herself remembering Harold's classroom, where he had taught students about tragic heroes in literature, characters whose greatest strengths became the source of their downfall. Rex's loyalty and determination had saved Harold once, but now threatened to destroy both of them, as the dog refused to accept that some battles couldn't be won. Chief Administrator Hayes returned with legal counsel, the media attention having escalated the situation beyond normal hospital protocols. The story of Rex's heroic rescue had captured national imagination, but now faced the reality that heroic gestures don't always guarantee happy endings. We have reporters camping outside, animal welfare organizations demanding updates, and the mayor's office asking about memorial plans, Hayes informed Sarah. "I'm sorry to burden you with this during such a difficult time, but decisions about Rex's welfare are becoming public concerns." Sarah realized that her father's story had grown beyond their family crisis. People across the country were invested in both Harold's recovery and Rex's well-being, creating pressure for outcomes that medical reality might not provide. The dog, who had become a symbol of loyalty and hope, was now at risk of becoming a symbol of futile devotion. Dr. Rodriguez returned with consultation results from the neurology team. Harold's brain scans showed extensive damage that made recovery unlikely, while his cardiac function remained unstable despite medication. The medical consensus was that further intervention would extend suffering without meaningful improvement. "I need to ask about your father's wishes regarding extraordinary measures," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully. "His living will mentions comfort care in terminal situations, but the definition of terminal can be subjective." Sarah looked through the room's window at Rex maintaining his vigil beside her father's motionless form. The German Shepherd's dedication was absolute, but Sarah wondered if continuing life support was honoring her father's wishes or simply postponing the inevitable while traumatizing the dog who had already sacrificed so much. The weight of decision felt impossible. Harold had lived independently, maintained his dignity, and formed a remarkable partnership with Rex that had literally saved his life. Now Sarah faced choosing between fighting for every possible moment of existence or accepting that some stories don't end with miraculous recoveries. As evening approached, Harold's condition continued deteriorating despite maximum medical intervention. Rex's distress increased proportionally, his service dog training warring with emotional attachment as he watched his handler slip away despite his heroic rescue efforts. The room filled with the quiet desperation of people and animals confronting the limits of love, loyalty, and medical science. Margaret sat beside Rex, her hand resting on his trembling shoulders, while Sarah held her father's hand and wrestled with decisions that would define the rest of her life. The heroic story that had captured the nation's attention was approaching a crossroads where courage would be measured not by dramatic rescues, but by the wisdom to know when letting go represented the deepest form of love. Outside the hospital, media crews and well-wishers maintained their vigil, unaware that inside room 314, a family was preparing to discover whether love meant fighting to the end or finding peace in surrender. As Sarah sat in the hospital chapel at midnight, wrestling with the impossible decision about her father's care, she discovered something that would change everything. While searching through Harold's personal effects for guidance about his wishes, she found a hidden compartment in his worn leather wallet containing a folded letter addressed to her in her father's careful handwriting. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Rex has done what we trained for. I've been keeping this secret because I didn't want to worry you, but my doctor told me 6 months ago that I had significant cardiovascular blockages that could cause a stroke at any time. Rather than burden you with my fears, I decided to prepare." Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. Harold's letter revealed that he had been secretly working with Rex's former military trainer to develop an emergency response protocol. The dog's remarkable action in stopping the ambulance hadn't been instinct. It had been the result of months of careful preparation by a father who wanted to protect both his daughter and his beloved companion. "Rex isn't just my pet," Harold had written. "He's my partner in facing the inevitable. We both carry invisible wounds, his from war, mine from losing your mother. We've been healing each other, and if something happens to me, I need you to know that Rex will need healing too. Don't let them separate us, even at the end." But the most shocking revelation came in the letter's final paragraph. "I've made arrangements with Dr. Elena Rodriguez at Hartford Hospital to participate in their new animal therapy research program. Rex and I volunteered to be test subjects for a study examining the healing power of human-animal bonds. What we've discovered together could help thousands of veterans and elderly people facing similar challenges." Sarah rushed back to Harold's room, where Margaret was maintaining her vigil alongside Rex. Dr. Rodriguez was checking Harold's vitals when Sarah burst through the door with the letter clutched in her hands. "Dr. Rodriguez, did you know about this?" Sarah demanded, showing her the letter. Dr. Rodriguez read the letter with growing amazement. "I had no idea Harold was documenting our research so thoroughly. Yes, he and Rex have been part of our pilot program studying therapeutic bonds between veterans and service animals, but I never knew he was preparing for this specific scenario." Margaret looked up sharply. "What research program?" "We've been studying cases where former military service dogs are paired with elderly veterans or civilians dealing with PTSD and social isolation," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Harold and Rex have been our most successful case study. Their bond has measurably improved both of their health outcomes over the past 6 months." Sarah felt a mix of pride and hurt. Her father had been participating in groundbreaking research while she remained oblivious to his life. "What does this mean for his current condition?" Dr. Rodriguez pulled up data on her tablet that Sarah had never seen before. "Your father's medical records show remarkable improvements in blood pressure, sleep patterns, and cognitive function since Rex joined his household. The dog hasn't just been a companion, he's been providing measurable therapeutic benefits." Rex, as if sensing the conversation concerned him, lifted his head and looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. The German Shepherd's behavior had been unusual throughout the crisis, showing signs of intelligence that went beyond typical service animal training. "There's something else," Dr. Rodriguez continued, her voice taking on an excited edge. "Rex's behavior during your father's medical emergency wasn't just heroic, it was scientifically significant. His ability to detect the stroke before symptoms were obvious. His precise execution of the emergency protocol and his ongoing monitoring of Harold's condition represent the most advanced human-animal medical partnership we've ever documented. Margaret stood up slowly, understanding dawning on her face. You're saying this was all planned? Not the stroke itself, Dr. Rodriguez clarified, but Harold's preparation for a medical emergency was incredibly sophisticated. He and Rex had been practicing emergency scenarios, developing communication protocols, even conditioning Rex to recognize different types of medical personnel and equipment. Sarah realized that her father's financial struggles, which she had discovered through the hospital paperwork, took on new meaning. Harold had been investing his limited resources not in his own comfort, but in training and preparing Rex to save his life and potentially help others facing similar challenges. As if summoned by their conversation, Chief Administrator Hayes appeared in the doorway with a man Sarah didn't recognize, a distinguished African-American gentleman in military uniform. "This is Colonel James Washington from the Department of Veterans Affairs," Hayes announced. He flew here specifically to assess Rex's status and the research program. Colonel Washington approached Rex with the confidence of someone familiar with military working dogs. Rex immediately responded with perfect military bearing, sitting at attention despite his exhaustion and emotional distress. "This dog is a national asset," Colonel Washington said after a brief examination. "His service record includes 12 combat saves and pioneering work in PTSD therapy. If what I'm hearing about his current actions is accurate, Rex has just demonstrated the most advanced civilian medical alert capabilities ever documented." Sarah found herself caught between grief over her father's condition and amazement at the complexity of what Harold and Rex had accomplished together. Her father hadn't just been living quietly in retirement. He had been contributing to research that could revolutionize elder care and veteran support services. "Colonel Washington, what does this mean for Rex if—" Sarah couldn't finish the question about her father's prognosis. "If Mr. Thompson doesn't recover, Rex would normally return to military custody for reassignment," the colonel replied. "However, given the significance of this case and his contribution to civilian research, we're prepared to consider alternative arrangements." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward with new information that would prove crucial. "I've been reviewing Harold's brain scans with our neurology team. While the damage is significant, there are signs of activity in areas we didn't expect. The bond with Rex appears to be stimulating neurological responses that standard medical intervention hasn't achieved." Margaret, drawing on her decades of emergency medical experience, asked the critical question, "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that Rex might be providing therapeutic benefits that are literally keeping Harold's brain active in ways our machines can't measure," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "The dog's presence could be the difference between recovery and permanent vegetative state." Sarah looked at Rex, who had returned to his position beside Harold's bed. The German Shepherd's vigil wasn't just emotional devotion, it was active medical intervention based on training and instinct that surpassed human capabilities. The revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of her decision. Separating Rex from Harold wouldn't just be emotionally cruel. It could eliminate her father's best chance of recovery. The dog who had saved Harold's life might be the key to bringing him back to consciousness. Colonel Washington made an unprecedented offer. Given the research implications and Rex's demonstrated capabilities, the VA is prepared to fund continued medical care for both Harold and Rex as part of our therapeutic animal program. This could become a model for veteran care nationwide. As dawn approached, Harold's vital signs showed the first subtle improvements in over 12 hours. Rex immediately sensed the change, his alert posture intensifying as he focused on Harold's face with laser-like attention. The machines registered what Rex had detected minutes earlier. Harold's brain activity was increasing. Dr. Rodriguez checked the monitors with growing excitement. "He's showing signs of emerging consciousness. Blood pressure stabilizing, neurological responses improving," Margaret leaned forward, her years of emergency experience recognizing the signs of a patient fighting back from the edge of death. "Harold, can you hear us?" Harold's eyelids fluttered slightly, and Rex's tail moved for the first time since the crisis began. The German Shepherd's soft whine seemed to call his handler back from wherever his consciousness had retreated. Sarah took her father's hand, feeling the faintest squeeze in response. "Dad, Rex is here. He saved you. We're all here." Harold's eyes opened slowly, unfocused but alive. His first whispered word was barely audible. "Rex." The German Shepherd's tail wagged once, a controlled expression of joy that maintained his professional demeanor while acknowledging his mission's success. Harold was alive, conscious, and beginning the long journey back to recovery that would validate everything they had trained for together. The research data, the media attention, and the administrative complexities faded into background noise as Sarah witnessed the power of a bond that had transcended species, overcome medical odds, and proven that love, whether human or canine, could literally work miracles. The months that followed Harold's miraculous recovery became a testament to the healing power of unconditional love and second chances. Sarah had made the life-changing decision to relocate permanently from Portland to Hartford, selling her Oregon home and moving into Harold's colonial house on Elm Street. The transition wasn't just geographical, it represented a fundamental shift in family priorities that had been long overdue. Harold's rehabilitation progressed slowly but steadily, with Rex serving as both companion and unofficial therapy assistant. The German Shepherd's presence during physical therapy sessions seemed to motivate Harold beyond what medical professionals thought possible. When Harold struggled with speech exercises, Rex would sit patiently, tilting his head as if listening intently to every word. When fatigue made walking difficult, Rex positioned himself perfectly to provide stability and encouragement. Dr. Rodriguez documented their progress meticulously, as Harold and Rex had become the flagship case study for Hartford Hospital's groundbreaking animal therapy research program. The data they generated was revolutionizing understanding of human-animal therapeutic bonds, attracting attention from medical institutions across the country. Harold's recovery metrics consistently exceeded expectations, with improvements in cognitive function, motor skills, and emotional well-being that correlated directly with Rex's presence and participation in his care. Sarah found herself rediscovering her father through daily interactions that had been impossible when she lived across the continent. Harold's wisdom, humor, and resilience became apparent in ways that brief phone calls and infrequent visits had never revealed. She learned about his volunteer work with literacy programs, his quiet financial support of struggling former students, and his deep philosophical conversations with Rex during their morning walks. The house on Elm Street underwent subtle modifications to accommodate Harold's mobility limitations while maintaining the dignity and independence he valued. Sarah installed grab bars disguised as decorative elements, rearranged furniture to create clear pathways, and established a routine that balanced Harold's need for assistance with his desire for autonomy. Rex adapted to these changes with remarkable intelligence, learning to position himself strategically to prevent falls while never making Harold feel supervised or restricted. Margaret O'Sullivan became a regular visitor, her relationship with Harold evolving from grateful former student to trusted family friend. She shared stories of how Harold's teaching had influenced her career in emergency medicine, while Harold marveled at the confident, capable woman she had become. Their conversations often centered around the interconnectedness of life, how a teacher's encouragement in 1987 had led to a paramedic being in exactly the right place to save his life in 2023. The media attention surrounding Rex's heroic rescue gradually evolved into something more meaningful. national awareness of the challenges facing elderly Americans living alone and the potential for service animals to address those challenges. Harold and Rex's story became a catalyst for policy discussions about Medicare coverage for therapeutic animals, funding for veteran adoption programs, and support services for aging populations. Chief Administrator Hayes, initially concerned about policy violations, became one of the program's strongest advocates after witnessing Harold's recovery. Hartford Hospital's animal therapy initiative expanded rapidly, with Rex serving as an unofficial ambassador for the program. Other elderly patients requested similar arrangements, leading to partnerships with local animal shelters and veteran organizations to match service dogs with individuals who could benefit from their companionship and protection. Colonel Washington maintained regular contact with Harold and Rex, documenting their civilian success story for VA programs nationwide. Rex's transition from military service to medical therapy work became a model for other retired service dogs, proving that their skills could be repurposed for civilian medical applications. The colonel often remarked that Rex's civilian service might ultimately save more lives than his military deployment had. Sarah's relationship with her teenagers, Emma and Jake, improved dramatically as they spent summers and holidays in Hartford. The multi-generational household created opportunities for meaningful connections that had been impossible when everyone lived separate lives in different time zones. Harold's grandchildren learned to appreciate his stories, his patience, and his partnership with Rex, while Harold found new purpose in being present for their important moments. The financial pressures that had worried Harold before his stroke were addressed through an unexpected source. The success of the animal therapy research program attracted federal funding that provided Harold with a small stipend as a research participant. More importantly, Sarah's presence eliminated many of the expenses associated with living alone, while her remote work arrangement allowed her to contribute to household finances without sacrificing family time. Rex's role evolved from service dog to family member to community ambassador. Local schools invited Harold and Rex to speak about responsible pet ownership and the importance of service animals. Senior centers requested visits to demonstrate the benefits of animal companionship. The German Shepherd's calm demeanor and obvious intelligence made him an ideal representative for the therapeutic animal movement. Margaret's involvement deepened as she transitioned from emergency medicine to geriatric care, inspired by Harold's recovery and her own experiences with her mother's final years. She specialized in cases involving elderly patients with companion animals, advocating for policies that recognize the medical benefits of human-animal bonds. Her research, co-authored with Dr. Rodriguez, became required reading in veterinary schools and medical programs across the country. The one-year anniversary of Harold's stroke was marked by a celebration that brought together the entire extended community that had formed around his recovery. The hospital staff, Colonel Washington, Margaret, Dr. Rodriguez, Sarah's ex-husband Mark, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Harold and Rex's story gathered in the park where everything had begun. Harold, walking slowly but steadily with his cane, returned to the exact spot where he had collapsed. Rex positioned himself at Harold's side with the same protective attention he had shown throughout their partnership, but his alertness now carried joy rather than anxiety. The German Shepherd's tail wagged frequently during the celebration, a sign of contentment that had been absent during the crisis months. Dr. Rodriguez presented findings from the research program, revealing that Harold's case had led to policy changes in 17 states regarding service animals in medical facilities. Insurance companies were beginning to recognize therapeutic animal relationships as legitimate medical interventions, and Medicare pilot programs were testing coverage for service dog training and care. Sarah stood beside her father as he addressed the small crowd, his speech still slightly affected by the stroke, but his message clear and powerful. "Rex saved my life," Harold said simply. "But more than that, he saved my family." Sometimes we think independence means doing everything alone, but real independence means building relationships strong enough to support us when we need them most. The ceremony concluded with Harold and Rex taking their traditional morning walk through the park, now accompanied by Sarah, Margaret, and dozens of friends who had become family through shared crisis and recovery. Rex's pace matched Harold's careful steps, his position unchanged from that first day when a German shepherd's loyalty had stopped an ambulance and changed countless lives. As the sun set over Maple Grove Park, Harold reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from his darkest moment. The stroke that had threatened to end his independence had instead brought his family closer, created friendships that spanned decades, and contributed to research that would help thousands of elderly Americans facing similar challenges. Rex settled beside Harold's favorite bench, his amber eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with the calm alertness of a protector whose mission had evolved from emergency response to daily companionship. The German shepherd's presence was no longer about preparing for crisis, it was about celebrating the ordinary moments that made life worth living. Sarah took her father's hand as they watched Rex investigate familiar scents around the oak tree where everything had changed. The fear and guilt that had defined their relationship for years had been replaced by gratitude for second chances and the wisdom to appreciate time together. Harold's recovery had taught them all that healing wasn't just about returning to previous conditions, it was about building something better from the pieces that remained. The story of a dog who blocked an ambulance had become something larger, a testament to the power of preparation, the importance of community, and the truth that love, whether human or canine, could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Rex's heroic action had saved Harold's life, but their partnership had saved something equally precious: the belief that loyalty, dedication, and unconditional love could create miracles in the most ordinary circumstances. A message for our community. This story reminds us that our golden years don't have to mean facing life's challenges alone. Like Harold and Rex, we can build partnerships with family, friends, and even faithful companions that provide both practical support and emotional strength. Harold's preparation and Rex's unwavering loyalty teach us that independence isn't about isolation. It's about creating relationships strong enough to catch us when we fall. Whether it's reconnecting with distant children, volunteering in our communities, or simply being present for those who need us, we all have the power to be someone's Rex, the guardian who refuses to give up when it matters most. Your story of resilience, like Harold's, has the power to inspire and heal others facing similar challenges. Let's connect and share. Have you experienced a moment when an unexpected hero, whether human or animal, changed your life? What relationships in your life provide the kind of unwavering support that Rex showed Harold? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.